Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast, brought to you by Rocket Agency. I'm your host, James Lawrence. Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast. I'm here today with Taz Bareham. Taz, welcome back to the pod.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
It's awesome to have you back. So for those of you that didn't catch Taz's first episode, it was about the rise of the fractional CMO, and it was one of the most listened to episodes we've had so far. So definitely worth a listen if that's something you're interested in. But if you didn't hear Taz's first pod, then you wouldn't have got the introduction. So I'll introduce her. So Taz has over 20 years of experience across B2B, B2C, and SaaS. Previously, she was the head of brand and comms at eBay, CMO at Ansarada, Job Adder, as well as Resdi. In addition to her client-side role, she's worked in strategy and planning roles at agencies like Clemenger and M&C Saatchi. She's now working across a range of businesses as a fractional CMO. And I wanted to get Taz onto the pod to have a conversation around marketing measurement, showing the value of marketing within an organization. And we're chatting just prior to recording. And I think for us, this is not a conversation if you're in an e-commerce environment, if you're in an environment which is fast moving, big data sets, and you're trying to think of marketing mix modeling and you've got really awesome attribution. I think this is a conversation around those marketers and those of us working in businesses where it's a longer path to purchase. It might not necessarily be dollar in, dollar out marketing. And I think for so many marketers that I speak to, it's so hard to show value in the work you're doing. There's always this kind of, well, if you can, prove it's working, we'll keep putting more money in, but it's setting expectation correctly. So thought an awesome person to have onto the pod would be Taz. You've got so much experience, I think, kind of both inside of marketing teams and outside. So that's a quite a big introduction, Taz. But I think solve that difficult challenge. But I thought a nice place to start the conversation would just be to kind of talk about what you see marketers struggling with when you kind of go in and meet with new teams or meet with new businesses.
Yeah, sure. So in my role as a fractional CMO, I tend to go into businesses where they've got maybe a handful of established marketers, but they tend to be more marketing manager level. And I usually get called in because maybe the leadership team are looking at the marketing team and trying to work out what it is they're doing and how to relate the value they're bringing through to the business objectives. And so the key thing that I work with marketing teams on is really how to understand what they're looking at and how to connect the dots for the leadership team. So the one thing I say to everybody that I see them struggle with is how to contextualize their data and how to create a clear line through to the business objectives. I say get close to the data as fast as possible. What I see marketers get stuck with is when I say that is that they get lost in campaign metrics or isolated months of data. And they make sweeping generalizations of what they're looking at, and they haven't kind of looked broadly at the context. So like seasonality, trends over time, they're looking at isolated months and not looking back at whether that's an anomaly month, or they might spend time overemphasizing focus on things like website traffic, and they're not really reading their audience. So the CEO doesn't really care about how many people are coming to the website. They care about who's coming in the door and creating a sales opportunity or converting as a sales lead. So really it's about getting to know your audience, contextualizing your data, looking for relationships across the data points that you're looking at, and starting to relate everything from a business perspective rather than just a marketing perspective.
Yeah.
I've got a lot more to add, but that's generally what I see is just that sort of the tricky bit for marketers, that they sit very in a funnel vision and not looking at the outside world.
And how do you kind of connect that business strategy to marketing? And how similar is it? Like, is generally and most of the kind of metrics numbers you're looking at quite similar when you come into a business, or is it very contingent on the industry and the type of business and where they're at in their journey?
Yeah, good question. I mean, every business objective, the CEO is looking at revenue, net new revenue, and where it's coming from as an important metric from a business perspective, no matter what kind of business you're in. So if you start there and work backwards to say, okay, where's the revenue coming from? and where is marketing having an influence on that revenue, and then work back from that to say, okay, how are we influencing that? And look at the full sort of buyer journey, the buyer cycle, the conversion rates across through that buyer cycle, and the metrics that are important at different points in that buyer cycle. Then you can start to map out what are ones that marketing owns directly, what are ones that marketing influences, and what are ones that maybe marketing doesn't directly influence, but by working closely with other teams can have a better understanding on and, be part of that conversation. And so I think that a lot of the time marketing, and this is just in the businesses that I happen to have worked in, I find that marketing can feel a little siloed from the rest of the business. Um, and often it's really about making sure there's a go-to-market team that looks at the full buyer journey and potentially moves to goals that are more aligned to the full buyer journey rather than isolated metrics and where everybody's like pointing fingers at each other and blaming each other,
Yeah.
breaking down those silos. And not everything, because there are some that's specific to roles, right? And then for marketers, there's obviously leading indicators to say, are we on the right path that nobody else cares about, but will influence marketing strategy? But there are opportunities to connect the dot into other teams and make sure that those conversations are happening with other teams as well. With marketing, I say, your biggest job as a marketer some of the time is to get your internal team on board. When you do, and when they're clear about what you're doing and why you're doing it, and they have the opportunity to question and put them input into that and feel heard, they can become your biggest advocates. But when you're not championing the internal story and making sure that you're communicating often and clearly, nobody knows what you're doing. And that's where
Mm.
the pointing starts. And you can find that instead of being your biggest advocates, they can be your biggest thorn in your side.
And when you say internal team, is that synonymous with kind of sales teams, or is it broader than that?
It's broader than that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You need to be, if you've got a sales team, if you're in a business that has a sales team, then marketing needs to get close to the sales team to understand how, where those frustration points are and how they can get closer to the sales conversations and to support those conversations. But typically, I mean, my background's in SaaS, so you have a responsibility right through to activated
Mm.
customer. So through customer success and onboarding. And then, arguably marketing is getting more and more. It's like a full, any touch point is a brand opportunity, right? So even for existing customers and building out that flywheel of advocacy, it's like, how are you influencing that? How are you helping that happen within the business as well? So you're not just sitting there thinking, I'm only opening the door and then everything else is everybody else's responsibility. But it's like, how can you be part of that journey all the way through and add value to the customer, the prospects, but then also the teams that are dealing with those touch points will see greater value in marketing as well.
So if you're in, say, SaaS, longer buyer journey, potentially multiple stakeholders, on the prospect side, are you still, if you're coming into an organization, you've looked at the business plan, you've met with the C-suite CEO, are you kind of then working, when you talked about mapping the customer journey, are you still kind of thinking like a funnel in some ways? Like, what are those activities, at the top of the funnel, and what are some metrics that matter there, middle, bottom kind of thing? Is that like philosophically how you're still approaching things?
I mean, it depends whether you buy into the funnel, the flywheel, or whatever other trait that we're dealing with. But I think understanding influence points throughout a buyer journey, whatever shape it takes,
Yeah.
is important to say, okay, what can marketing influence at each of those points, and how would I measure that marketing is having an influence at those points? Is probably what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
But yeah, so when I'm going into a business from a SaaS perspective, the famous number that everyone puts out there is only sort of 3 to 5% of your market are ever in buying mode at any point in time.
Yeah.
Um, Businesses have swung from being very brand focused to being very performance and direct response focused, and now kind of the pendulum swinging back to okay, we need to invest in longer term strategy and ongoing sort of thought leadership and building that presence in market. It can't all just focus on the kind of the bottom
Demand gen.
or the traditional bottom of the funnel,
Yeah.
ready to buy right now. So then it's like, how do you champion that longer term strategy as well in the mix? And also, there's a huge opportunity in SaaS in particular, or when I've mentioned Flywheel, for there may be partners that you're working with that are an opportunity. There may be existing customer base that can create that advocacy. There's cross sell, there's upsell opportunities. There's all of that that are opportunities to create inbound revenue or net new revenue for the business that aren't just going and trying to find people that don't know you that yet that aren't even in the market to buy,
Yeah.
which can be very costly, especially if you're not doing all the other stuff to support that as well. And so I think, um, especially in businesses where they've got a small team and they've got to make some decisions on where they're focusing, sometimes it's going through and just really talking to them about where they are focusing and are they focusing for the biggest impact. And potentially it's about closing up some leaky buckets in the buyer journey as opposed to going out to market and trying to find new potential leads, you
Yeah.
know?
Which I guess you don't identify unless you've properly mapped what that customer journey is, right? And
You're
where
saying what,
people.
where, and what's happening. Yeah.
And in terms of leading indicators and lagging indicators, if we could just kind of unpack that for a little while.
Yeah. So leading indicators are anything before they've happened and they help you predict sort of future outcomes and course correct early. They're probably more important to the marketer than they are to the rest of the business, maybe your CMO as well, but that's where you might be looking at um, website traffic, engagement rate, new visitors, click-through rates, anything that's suggesting what might happen off the back of it. And so if you're running a campaign and you can see a sudden spike of interest, then you can look at, maybe it's the ad creative, maybe it's the targeting that's been really working well for you. And then you've got to track that through to success, right? And then lagging indicators are a reflective back of what's happening. So it tends to be things like, revenue. So did you make the sale? Was that a successful campaign? It might be return on ad spend. It might be churn rate, that sort of thing. So it's after the fact. And both are really important as a marketer because they're helping you build up a full picture of what you thought was going to happen and what
Mm,
actually happened. And then when you've got that, you can reflect back on that. And as you're planning for your next campaign to go, okay, um, what do I think I need to put my effort for success? And what do I think is going to happen? Again, always planning for what's going to happen, what you're expecting, measuring it, seeing if what you're expecting happened, and then being able to adjust your strategy the next time as well. So that's what leading and lagging are.
And what advice do you have for marketers that might not be great with data, great with numbers, analytics, statistics, but you're not necessarily in a huge team where you can kind of just pull in other parts of the business? Like, what advice would you have on that? Because I imagine a lot of these things don't come that naturally to a lot of marketers.
No, but there's always somebody that works in finance. So the first thing I would do is go and spend some time
Mm,
with that person in finance that's pulling report for the CEO, for the board, and understand what's important for them and
mm,
how are they taking the data that you're giving them or data they're pulling from the rest of the business and preparing reports for the board and for the C-suite. Because that's when you can get the sort of business context of what you're looking at. So they may not be able to show you absolute reports. Hopefully they can because your
mm,
business is open and transparent. But when you see what the board is looking at, then you can start to understand how you might play a picture. And even if not that bit's not obvious, you can start to use or reflect back some of the language that they're using or that they're focusing on when you're explaining what you're doing.
mm,
And you might not get it right all the time at the beginning, but the very fact that you're trying to relate it to business metrics will be noticed and will put you in good stead. But yeah, there'll be somebody in finance that's not at a sort of CFO level that you can spend time with, get them to explain some of the terms and some of the things that are important at a business level so that you can start that learning journey. And then obviously you can always tap into AI and have a good
mm,
conversation. So I want to learn about this stuff. What's a learning pathway for me to get closer to understanding business metrics and how that relates to marketing metrics?
mm.
Um,
That's an awesome response, right? Because I think yeah, can I kind of connects all the dots, doesn't it? It's elevating the conversation that you're having within the business. You're kind of moving. It's important, I think, for all marketers to understand CPCs and CPMs and all those things, but you also need to be taken seriously and to do a
yeah,
good job, right? You need to be
yeah,
understanding, what actual impact you're having on bottom line, right?
Yeah.
But it also, I think, is showing goodwill and an eagerness to work
Initiative.
with the finance team and
Yeah.
initiative and
Same
all
for the
those.
sales team, like, pick
Mm,
somebody in the sales team that you feel like you can talk to easily and just get to know what they are seeing when you hand over to them. What are they doing? Where are their frustrations? What is their process? Like, what are they being judged on as well? And that helps you kind of complete the loop as well. As customer success, the more you can spend time with different people in the business and understand what's important to them, then when you're talking to them about what you're doing, you can relate it to them. And again, like I said, you're then talking to them about what they want to hear, not what you want to tell them.
mm,
Classic marketing, talk to your audience, not what you want to kind of deliver to them.
love it. Any other advice in terms of, I guess, demonstrating the value of marketing activities in an organization?
Um, yeah, I think I've said most of the things. So, making sure you're communicating clearly and often, understand who wants to know what within the business and what's important to them. So you're communicating things that are relevant to them rather than the things that you want to tell them. Um, Bewaring vanity metrics. So you're taken seriously within the business, getting close to that business data, and making sure that you're talking about marketing in the context of the business, not marketing in a vacuum. Spending time with others across the business as well. Um, and then if you're feeling overwhelmed, just take a breath and take a step back, because there is so many things that you could be doing
Mm,
and you can get a little bit bewildered and sunk. So just take a step back and think about, if it was your business, what would be most important to you first, and then lay it down from that. So you can make your long list, but then prune it right back. So you're not trying to measure too many things at once and just getting overwhelmed and then getting lost on what you're focusing on.
yeah. What advice would you have? Because I think something we hear so often is, we've got X, we're happy to spend X, and when we get Y back, we're happy to, 2X it. And like, of course, you would say that. And I think a lot of marketers are under so much pressure to demonstrate success. And it does feel there's always this kind of ebb and flow between brand and performance. And I think it's kind of like, of course, you'd put money in through performance and prove that it works. But most of the theory suggests that you won't get excellent performance unless you do properly invest in brand. And
Yeah.
like, how do you go about trying to educate non-marketers or non-believers in the importance of brand? And how do you see the best marketers working within their organization to have mature conversations to try to educate and try to get that buy-in to invest in metrics and activities that might not be super dollar in, dollar out in terms of how they manifest?
Um, this will be the bit where people's ears prick up, I reckon, 'cause it's an age-old conversation. And there's so many people on both camps, and there's so much noise on LinkedIn every day about this exact question. So there are increasing studies that support, and I would always say, if you can find data to back yourself up, always find data to back yourself up. There's been a bunch of studies that have been released recently, and I have to look them up to be able to quote them properly. But supporting why investing in brand is important. And that's the sort of stuff where I say, build your case study with data to go and have the conversation, but also know that you're never going to win by saying that you're just investing in brand. You've got to be kind of like, whatever the analogy is, chewing gum and running at the same time. You've got to learn to be able to do both and find
Mm,
the balance of both. So when I go into businesses, I always look for, what are some quick wins? What are some obvious things that feel like you can prove that the wheels can start turning, that give you permission to start doing some of the longer stuff along the way as well. Um, some companies have the budget to do things like brand tracking, to use things even like, there's a platform called Tracksuit, which has that
yeah.
continual always on brand tracking. You can look at PR coverage and social listening and surveys, branded search volume, all that sort of stuff that says people are getting to know about us. And then going back to some of that multi-touch attribution modeling that starts to look at the impact or the effect of different activity as a collective rather than individual channels, um, and looking at your marketing efficiency ratio. I know from working with Rocket, we've had campaigns where we've had brand activity and very direct response, performance-based activity, and can see over time when we switch any of the brand stuff off, maybe there isn't an impact straight away, but it starts to fade quite quickly, and you need that other stuff supporting you in order to kind of prove value. So anything that you can do like that to build case studies and bring data to try and build that argument, I think is really important.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, it's also lots of reading and making sure that you've got backup of smart people that are out there that are touting the goodness of investing in brand as well. But
Yeah.
just one solo voice in the business trying to say that. And I think any smart CEO and leadership team right now is reading all the stuff that's out there and all the data that's being thrown around and is probably aware of it. It's just working out what is the right balance for the business and what people are prepared to put behind it, knowing that some of those people don't intend to be around a long time, so they don't care about the long effects. They just want
Yeah.
you to make this month's and this next month's targets. Um,
It's,
yeah,
yeah, isn't it the challenge, isn't it? Where the the theory of good marketing, particularly, well, basically across the board, even if you're selling something more transactional, but the reality is that it takes years to build up a strong brand, and
yeah,
particularly if you're in this kind of SaaS or complex B2B, there might be a buying decision being made every year or 2 years or 3 or 5 by a
yeah,
business, and
yeah,
but we all run businesses on kind of monthly targets and quarterly targets,
yeah.
and boards and CEOs and investment doesn't come, or doesn't continue if you're not getting this kind of shot. So it's kind of
Wow.
chicken and the egg, isn't it? As to
Yeah.
how you. But I think you're
So,
right. I think the data piece, yeah, proving your point with data, even if it is third party studies or third party case studies,
mhm,
just as a when you're dealing probably with people that are often a bit more numbers driven
yeah.
and less kind of gut driven.
Yeah, I don't think you can ever build a case for brand without data behind you in for the C-suite. So I tend to, I earmark a lot of stuff on LinkedIn, especially anything that could help with that sort of conversation, and then create myself a little sort of a reference library, I suppose, to call on, depending on who I'm talking to, what sort of things to surface. But yeah, there's so much stuff on LinkedIn at the moment, in particular as a content source for these conversations, that anybody interested in this area can pretty much like search and find a whole bunch of people to follow that are very big advocates in this space.
Yeah, and that's good advice. And um, like, how do you? And it's so challenging, but how do you try to build out cases around attribution in these more complex environments where, last click can be misleading?
Yeah.
You're right. I think it's true to say across the board at Rocket, and it kind of goes, I think when we talk about brand in a digital context, you've kind of got two considerations. One is just a generally strong brand, right? We all feel a
Yeah.
certain way about
Mhm.
Qantas and Combank and whatever else. And it's not based on activity from the last couple of months. It's built up over decades of how
Yeah.
we feel for different reasons. So I kind of look at strong brands in that sense. There's brands out there that we all feel a certain connection to. Then when you go into market in their space, you're more likely to go forward with those brands because of decades of brand work. But then in digital, we definitely see with our clients that strong brands perform better, but then also brands running brand campaigns in the shorter term. So if you are running a whole bunch of activity, top of the funnel, YouTube display,
Mhm.
BVOD, whatever it might be, you will also drive much better kind of short-term performance campaigns, kind of
Yeah.
at both levels. But I guess how do you try to, I guess, in the different environments you've worked in, like how do you try to build up the best picture you can on attribution, and what are those things that are working? Webinars, white papers, content, all that stuff.
I lean heavily on my agency. No, I think so. In things like SaaS, we look at potentially cohort analysis. So people that are coming in during campaign periods and how they track over time, rather than month on month. So you might follow a cohort that's been heavily marketed to with brand activity at the same time, and then you might
Mm,
get lifetime value. But to that point, then you need to work with people that are committed to a longer term view of things to actually analyze and get an idea of what's going on. Because when you've got a long, complex sales cycle, a lead might come in October. They might not convert until June next year, but they may convert and then become a very valuable customer that's very loyal and provides advocacy and other leads into the business and stuff. So you kind of need to track that over time to work out what's going on rather than going, okay, we had these channels firing on this month. What happened in this month? What we think about it. So it's like, okay, of the ones that came in that month, are you proving that they're at a higher value or that they're a lower churn rate or, the lead quality was there, but you need to then look at that over a time period rather than just the little spikes. And that's what I was saying with marketers
Mm.
looking at only monthly data and not looking at the wider picture. It's very difficult to kind of create that story.
Yeah, I know we've worked together in the past where that's been totally borne out, right?
Yeah.
Where um, driving really good short-term results, successful in that period,
I mean,
then over time, when you actually look at lifetime value and, higher quality customers versus lower quality, they're coming from different activity. And
yeah,
if you were just judging everything based on month to month to month to month,
yeah,
you never actually would have realized that, customer bucket over here with this activity is
yeah.
actually over the longer term a far more valuable prospect, right?
Like throwing a promotion and then people buying on promotion and then they're churning at a greater rate. So if you're only looking at the month results, you go, woohoo, we've like doubled our lead volume, we've doubled our sales for the month, but they're out the door very quickly. Then was that a valuable thing to do versus slow and steady, nail wins the race or what is it? Hair.
So it might be good to now dig into like some of the struggles you see marketers having within organizations that you work within. Like what do you see as some of those kind of common challenges or common issues?
Um, so I think I mentioned before, sometimes marketers tend to take data at face value and in isolation. So the other thing that I see is sweeping generalizations, and this is just really about learning over time about context, for example. So sweeping generalizations, saying because this, then this, and making assumptions on the data that is in front of them, or making leaps of faith. And then CEO leadership team will pull that apart as soon as they see that. So, and then they won't believe anything else that you're
Mm,
saying. So you have to really make sure that you're solid in your thinking. You've done your research. You understand trends, relationships, the context versus absolute numbers. And then the other thing is globalization. So I think this is a term that doesn't mean say we're talking about the world, but it means that you're dialing data up to make a bigger assumption than it's possible. So, for example, because we've got a big spike in website traffic, that is going to have an effect on lead volume this month, which in turn will mean that our sales will spike. That's not necessarily true. We
mm,
don't know that there's a relationship between website traffic and leads and sales, unless you've worked that out and proven that a spike in traffic leads to those things. Because
mm,
we know between us that you can buy traffic,
yep.
um, and it doesn't mean it's good quality traffic, and it doesn't link down to the bottom line. And the CEO will want to know if you're making a statement, a big global statement, have you done due diligence to make sure that that's grounded in something, or are you looking naive and therefore
Mm,
you're kind of undermining anything else that you're then going to say in the rest of that delivery?
yep.
So, so avoiding sweeping generalizations, not taking things at face value, um, making sure you've got the kind of the context, the relationships, looking externally as well. I mean, we mentioned very briefly, he said, don't mention the election, but I'm going to. But in something like SaaS, where there's a long, complex buying cycle, things like weather or something that happened week on week don't make massive differences. But things that go on for a long time and put the heebie jeebies into a lot of people in terms of big decisions that they're going to make and security of business, etc., like an election, do have an impact. Election's an extreme one, but there are other significant things
Mm,
that are going on that you can look externally to, or if you're working with an agency, you can say you're working with a bunch of other clients. Are they seeing something like this in this particular point in time, or is it just us? Because sometimes the answer that you might come back with is this is a trend in the
mm,
market, not a trend just for us. And if we ride it out, we'll come back out the other side of it. So having some context is good. And then the other one I was going to say is before starting any initiative, working with marketers to say, think about what you expect to happen and don't just look at random metrics afterwards. Think about what you expect to happen and how you're going to measure it. What does success look like? What are you going to do if it goes the way you're thinking it's going to? Are you going to double down, put more money into it? What if it doesn't? What's
Mm,
your plan? Or if it doesn't go that way? So you're planning ahead and you're thinking about the data before you're into the knee deep in it, and then thinking about the impact. Because a lot of marketers I speak to have no shortage of ideas, right?
mm.
But what you want to think about is why are you doing that? What impact do you hope to have? How are you going to measure it? And how does that compare to all the other things that you could be doing to drive an impact?
Yeah. And I think it's the only thing that can actually keep marketers sane, because there is an infinite way of
Yeah,
going to market with any product. Every single marketing department in the country is limited by resources.
yeah,
And I think you just have this constant outside pressure, which is sales teams and CEOs. We should be doing this. Why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing this? I think the only actual way of being sane is to
yeah,
know this is what we're shooting for in terms
yeah,
of metrics or numbers or success. And then
yeah,
this is the path we've decided to go based on experience and research and past
mm,
data and whatever it might be. Otherwise, you will never get there, right? Because you'll constantly change tact
yeah,
and throw new tactics against the wall.
yeah. I think the other thing worth saying is everything seems measurable right now, but just because you can measure it doesn't mean you should measure it.
Mm,
And beware vanity metrics, because a lot of junior marketers get very excited about things that probably don't matter and won't have an impact down the line, and then present them as very exciting to senior people within the business. And again, that's just really about making sure that you're building your own personal brand within the business by knowing business metrics really well,
mm.
even though you might be excited about, followers or likes or whatever. Think about the audience that you're presenting to and what they actually care about, not what you want to tell them.
How many metrics? I know that it will depend, but in your experience working with pretty senior boards, heavy hitters, CEOs, etc., like how many? And you talked earlier around kind of tracking that buyer journey, and what are those things that kind of matter on the way through? How many metrics would you be presenting to a board, say, each month, or a
To a
CEO?
board, they don't really care about marketing metrics at all. They might be interested in marketing influence revenue.
Mhm.
Um, there's still a lot of companies that are interested in MQL, SQL, that sort of thing, and like they give you sort of MQL targets. But increasingly, the MQL is becoming a marketing qualified lead is becoming less relevant, and it's really about sort of sales speed of the sales cycle and successful kind of lead to sale um, conversion rates and things like that, rather
Mhm.
than number of MQLs, which becomes a less relevant figure.
Yeah.
But yeah, at a board level, they're really interested in more business metrics and then marketing influence on that, as opposed to cost per lead or click rate or anything like that.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think, and then in terms of if you're dealing with, say, managing director level, CEO level,
Yeah.
what kind of dashboard or numbers are you showing them to kind of say this is working or it's not working?
So, and that's something I do work with marketers on, is never to present just the month or the month on month, but always to present a trend line so they can see um, if it's an anomaly month and what's happening over time. So any dashboard that I put in front of a senior person would be visual with a trend line and a month to month number. And it'll be much more focused on sort of, like I said, sort of marketing influence revenue. It may have a lead volume number on that, but they're interested in more of that sort of conversion ratios
Yeah.
um, and relationships rather than any absolute numbers.
Yeah. And I do think that context bit you referenced earlier is so important. And you mentioned junior marketers, and I think I see it in the agency when we have more junior staff coming on board, and it is this almost having to defend results
Mm,
in that short term, month to month to month. This went down, but here's the reason. And it's okay to say there is a wider force at play here, right? And to your
yeah,
point, like US elections, then it almost doesn't matter which party wins an election. It's the uncertainty of who will win it before the election has been determined.
yeah,
Funding dries up. But same thing here every 2 to 3 years. when an election is called, certain budgets stop being spent, and that kind of ripples through an
Mm,
economy. There's no doubt that the last 12 months, last 24 months have been difficult for certain sectors based on inflation and
yeah.
interest rates and whatever else. So I think you're kind of doing yourself, but also your client a disservice if you're ignoring the kind of the macro factors that are at play.
Yeah.
And because you still need to navigate within those, right?
Yeah, that said, I'm being on the receiving end as a client as well. Obviously, there are bigger factors at play, and you want your agency to say, "This is what's happening in the world. This is what we're seeing across our client base."
Yeah.
But then, you know, being a CMO talking to an agency or being a CEO talking to a CMO, the next question is, so what? So what are
Yeah.
we going to do about it? What's in our control that we can do something with?
Yeah.
The one thing I would say is keep lines of communication open, communicate often, communicate clearly, visually, and never hide from a bad result. Always communicate it, but just make sure that you've got a plan of what you're going to do about it and clear on what the learning is in relation to that result and what you're going to do differently to try and turn that around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. I love it. I love it. Taz, awesome conversation. I'll finish the pod probably the same way we finished our last one, but I can't actually remember, to tell you the truth. What's the one piece of advice that you'd give to an in-house marketer? And this is an important one because you've got so much experience in this space.
Um,
The best piece of advice.
I will reiterate something that I said before because this is something that has stuck with me so many times in so many different roles is never forget your internal audience. And by that, I don't necessarily mean the C-suite, the leadership team, your boss, the people that you know are important. Think about all the people across the business that could be marketers with you and cheerleaders for what you're doing. The product team, if you've got one, the sales team, the finance team, they all are interested in what you are doing.
Mm,
Marketing is a fun department, but if you keep everything behind closed doors, it's easy to become quite siloed. So make sure you're really well connected across the business and you're communicating and advocating what the marketing team's up to regularly.
I love it. I think it's a great one. Taz, thanks so much for coming back onto the pod.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.